The dusty stagecoach rattled into Snowflake, Arizona territory, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1883, carrying a woman who knew her arrival would cause disappointment. Sarah Katherine Preston pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the small frontier town materialize through clouds of red desert dust. She was 42 years old, and the photograph she had sent to her prospective husband had been taken 20 years ago, back when her hair held no silver threads and her face bore no lines of hard-won experience. The stage jolted to a stop outside the general store, and Sarah took a steadying breath. She had written honestly in her letters about her widowhood, about losing her husband to cholera 5 years ago in Missouri, about her 2 grown children who had their own lives now. What she had not mentioned was her age. The photograph had seemed harmless at first, just something to show what she looked like. But as the correspondence continued and arrangements were made, the deception had grown heavier on her conscience with each passing day. She stepped down from the coach, her dark green traveling dress coated with trail dust, her carpetbag clutched in one hand. The driver handed down her trunk with a grunt, setting it on the wooden sidewalk with a thud. Sarah scanned the small crowd gathered to see the stage's arrival, looking for a man alone, a man waiting for someone. She spotted him immediately. He stood apart from the others, tall and lean, wearing work-worn denims and a blue shirt, his hat in his hands. His sandy brown hair was streaked with sun-bleached highlights, and even from a distance, she could see the way his blue eyes searched each passenger with nervous hope. Philip Wade. He had written beautiful letters, thoughtful and kind, speaking of his ranch 10 miles outside of town, of his cattle and horses, of his loneliness in a land he loved but found harsh without someone to share it with. Their eyes met. She saw the flicker of confusion cross his face, the way he glanced down at something in his hand, likely the photograph she had sent. She forced herself to walk toward him, chin raised, prepared for rejection. She had sold everything to make this journey. If he turned her away, she had just enough money for a room at the boarding house for perhaps a week, and then she did not know what would happen. "Mr. Wade?" she asked when she stood before him. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze moving from her face, where fine lines radiated from her gray eyes, to the silver that threaded through her dark brown hair despite her attempts to tuck it all beneath her bonnet. She saw him glance at the photograph in his hand again, an old tintype showing a young woman of 22 with smooth skin and a hopeful smile. "Miss Preston," he said, and she heard the question in his voice, the uncertainty. "Mrs. Preston," she corrected gently. "I am a widow." "I wrote to you about that." "Yes, madam, you did." He shifted his weight and she prepared herself for the polite dismissal. She had imagined it 100 times on the long journey west. He would tell her there had been a mistake. He would wish her well. He would turn away. Instead, he said, "This picture, though, this is not recent." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "No, it is not. I apologize for the deception, Mr. Wade. The photograph was taken 20 years ago before I married my late husband. I should have sent a current one, or at the very least, been honest about my age in my letters." "How old are you, madam, if you do not mind my asking?" "I am 42. She said it firmly, without apology, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I understand if this changes your mind about our arrangement. I should not have been dishonest. I have money enough for a room while I decide what to do next." Philip Wade was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those clear blue eyes. Around them, the town continued its business. A wagon rattled past. Someone called out a greeting. Sarah stood perfectly still, waiting for her fate to be decided by this stranger she had agreed to marry. Then he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Well, Mrs. Preston, I reckon age means wisdom to me. Lord knows I could use some wisdom around my place. I have been making a mess of things on my own for near about 10 years now." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not realized she had been holding so tightly. "You mean you still want to go through with it?" "With the marriage, if you are still willing," he said. "I will not lie to you and say I was not surprised just now. I was. But I have been reading your letters for 6 months, madam, and I fell in love with the person who wrote those words. That person is standing in front of me right now, is she not? A few lines on your face and some silver in your hair do not change the kindness in your letters or the intelligence in your thoughts." "I am sorry I was not honest from the beginning," Sarah said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "It was wrong of me. We all do things we are not proud of," Philip said. "What matters is whether we can build something honest going forward." He held out his arm. "My wagon is just down the street. Would you like to see the ranch before we visit the preacher? I want you to know what you are agreeing to. It is not fancy. I work hard, but the land does not give up its bounty easy out here." Sarah placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt sleeve. "I would like that very much." They walked to his wagon, and Philip loaded her trunk with an ease that spoke of his strength. The wagon itself was sturdy and well-maintained, the 2 horses hitched to it healthy and calm. Sarah accepted his help climbing onto the seat, and then they were moving through Snowflake, past the handful of buildings that made up the town center. "It is smaller than I expected," Sarah admitted. "Snowflake is young yet," Philip said. "Founded about 8 years ago by Mormon pioneers. Good people mostly. They take care of each other. The land here is high desert, gets cold in winter despite what you might think. We get snow, hence the name. The little Colorado River is not far. That is our water source." As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up before them. Red rock formations rose in the distance, and the scrubby vegetation dotted the rolling terrain. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way, so different from the green hills of Missouri that Sarah had left behind. "Tell me about your children," Philip said as the horses pulled them along the dusty road. "Your letters mentioned a son and a daughter. James is 24 now. He married a good woman 2 years ago and works as a clerk in a law office in St. Louis. My daughter, Margaret, is 21. She married last year and moved to Kansas with her husband, who is a school teacher." Sarah smiled, thinking of them. They have their own lives now. They did not need their mother hovering around them anymore. That is part of why I decided to answer your advertisement. You must miss them. "I do," Sarah admitted. "But they are happy, and that is what matters. And I was lonely, Mr. Wade. The house we had lived in felt too large and too empty. I would sit in the evening with my mending and realize I had not spoken out loud to another person all day." "I know that feeling," Philip said quietly. "I talk to my cattle and horses more than is probably sane for a man." That made Sarah laugh, a genuine sound of amusement that felt good after the tension of her arrival. "I talk to my chickens," she confessed. I would tell them all about what I was reading in the newspaper, as if they cared about politics and railroad expansion. Philip laughed too, and the sound was warm and rich. "We will be a fine pair then, already half mad from loneliness." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The sun beat down from a cloudless sky, and Sarah was grateful for her bonnet. The air smelled different here, dry and dusty with hints of sage and something else she could not identify. "That is juniper you are smelling," Philip said when she mentioned it, "and piñon pine. They grow all through this high country. The wood burns hot and smells good. You will appreciate it come winter. You can read minds, Mr. Wade. You had a look on your face like you were puzzling something out. I just guessed." He glanced at her. "And perhaps we should move to first names, seeing as we are planning to marry. I am Philip. My friends call me Phil." "Sarah," she offered. "I prefer the full name if you do not mind. My late husband always shortened it to Sally, and it still pains me a little to hear." "Sarah it is," Philip agreed. "That is a good, strong name." The ranch appeared gradually as they crested a low rise. It sat in a shallow valley with rocky hills rising behind it. The house was modest, built of lumber with a covered porch across the front. It needed paint, Sarah noticed, and some of the steps looked like they could use repair. A barn stood behind the house, along with a few other outbuildings. Corrals held several horses, and in the distance, Sarah could see cattle grazing. "It is not much," Philip said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it is mine, bought and paid for, 160 acres. I have been building the herd for 10 years. I have near about 200 head of cattle now and a dozen horses. I sell the cattle in the fall, keep the money careful, and I am slowly making improvements." "It looks like you work very hard," Sarah said honestly. "The fences are in good repair, and the animals look healthy." Philip pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. "Would you like to see inside?" Sarah accepted his hand to step down, and they walked up the 3 steps to the porch together. Philip opened the front door and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and Sarah's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A cast iron stove dominated one wall, a table with 4 chairs sat near it, and a few worn chairs were arranged near a fireplace. Everything was clean but sparse. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decoration of any kind. It was a place where a man existed but did not really live. "There are 2 bedrooms," Philip said, pointing to doors on the far wall. "I use one for sleeping. The other has become a place where I store things, but it could be cleaned out. I thought, until we are more comfortable with each other, you might want your own space. I do not expect anything from you, Sarah, beyond companionship. I know that might sound strange, given that we are planning to marry, but I want you to feel safe here. Everything else can come in its own time if it comes at all." Sarah turned to look at him, this thoughtful man who had looked past her deception and offered her kindness instead of judgment. "That is very considerate of you, Philip. Thank you. There is a well out back with good water," he continued, seeming eager to fill the silence. "The privy is behind the barn. I know that is a bit of a walk, especially at night. That is one of the improvements I keep meaning to make, building a closer one, but there is always something else that needs doing first." "I understand. I lived on a farm with my late husband. I know how the work is never really finished." Philip nodded. "Would you like some water?" "You must be parched from the journey." "That would be wonderful." He fetched her a dipper of cool water from a bucket, and Sarah drank gratefully. The water tasted clean and good, slightly mineral but refreshing. "What do you think?" Philip asked after she had finished. "Is this something you could make a life in?" Sarah looked around the Spartan house, thought about the small town 10 miles away, considered the vast open land so different from anything she had known. Then she looked at Philip Wade, who stood before her with honest hope in his eyes, who had looked at her aging face and said age meant wisdom to him. "I think I could," she said, "if you are still willing to have me." "Then let us go back to town and find that preacher," Philip said with a smile. They took a few minutes for Sarah to freshen up from the journey, and then they were back in the wagon, heading toward Snowflake as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Sarah's hands trembled slightly in her lap, and she folded them together to still them. "Are you nervous?" Philip asked. "Yes," she admitted. It has been a long time since I was a bride, and last time I had known my husband-to-be for 2 years before we married. This is quite different. We do not have to do this today, Philip said. We could wait, give you time to settle in to be sure. Sarah considered that. It was practical, sensible even. But she had learned something in her 42 years, something her younger self would not have understood. Sometimes you had to take a leap of faith. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts. And her instincts told her that Philip Wade was a good man, that his letters had shown her his heart, and that the kindness he had shown her today was not an aberration but his true character. "No," she said. "I do not want to wait, unless you do." "No, madam, I have been alone long enough." The preacher was a middle-aged man named Reverend Thomas, who lived in a small house behind the church. His wife, a plump, cheerful woman named Ruth, insisted on standing as witness along with the general store owner, Mr. Hendricks, whom Philip pulled away from his counter with an explanation that required a wedding witness. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Sarah spoke her vows clearly, promising to honor and cherish Philip Wade, and she meant every word. Philip's voice was steady as he made his promises to her, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Philip leaned down and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to her lips. "Congratulations," Ruth said warmly, embracing Sarah. "Welcome to Snowflake. You must come to dinner soon. I want to hear all about you." "That is very kind," Sarah said, surprised by the welcome. "We look after each other out here," Ruth said. "That is how we survive." Mr. Hendricks shook Philip's hand and nodded to Sarah. "Wade is a good man, works hard. You will do well together." They signed the marriage certificate, and then Sarah and Philip were walking back to the wagon in the early evening light, husband and wife. Sarah felt strange, untethered, as if she had stepped into someone else's life. But when Philip helped her up onto the wagon seat and his hand lingered on hers for just a moment, she felt a spark of something, possibility perhaps, or hope. The ride back to the ranch was quieter. The sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air began to cool. Sarah watched the landscape roll by and tried to imagine it as home. "Are you hungry?" Philip asked as they neared the ranch. "I am not much of a cook, but I can make some beans and bacon. There is bread too, though it is a few days old." "That sounds fine, or if you like I could cook. I am quite a good cook if I may say so myself." "I would not ask you to cook on your wedding day." "Philip, I would be glad to. It will help me feel useful, and it will give me a chance to see what supplies you have on hand." So when they arrived at the ranch, while Philip tended to the horses, Sarah explored the kitchen area. She found supplies that told her Philip had been living on simple, practical meals. There were beans and bacon, flour and cornmeal, coffee and sugar, some canned goods. Not much in the way of fresh food, but she could work with what was there. By the time Philip came in from the barn, Sarah had a meal cooking on the stove. She had soaked some dried beans in hot water to soften them quickly. Fried bacon and onions she found in a small root cellar out back, and mixed up a batch of cornbread to bake in the oven. "Something smells wonderful," Philip said, and she heard genuine appreciation in his voice. "It is nothing fancy, but it will be hot and filling." "That is more than I usually manage." They sat down to eat together as the last light faded from the sky. Philip lit a kerosene lamp, and its warm glow pushed back the darkness. The food was simple but good, and Sarah felt a small sense of satisfaction at providing it. "This is the best meal I have had in longer than I can remember," Philip said, sopping up the last of the beans with a piece of cornbread. "You have a real talent, Sarah." "Thank you. My mother taught me. She always said a woman who could cook well would never go hungry, and she was right about that." After dinner, Philip insisted on helping her clean up, and they worked side by side at the dry sink. Sarah washing and Philip drying. It felt domestic and comfortable in a way that surprised her. "I should show you the other bedroom," Philip said when everything was put away. "If you want to sleep separately, I mean. Like I said, there is no pressure." "I think that would be wise, at least for now," Sarah said. "We hardly know each other, Philip. Let us give ourselves time." "Of course." He showed her to the smaller bedroom, carrying her trunk from where he had left it in the main room. The space was cluttered with tools and supplies, boxes of odds and ends, saddles and tack that needed repair. But there was a bed with a decent mattress and a small window that would let in morning light. "I will clear all this out tomorrow," Philip promised. "Tonight, if you want, you can use my room and I will sleep out here on the chair." "Absolutely not. I can manage here for one night. Just help me move a few of these boxes and I will be fine." Together they cleared enough space for her to access the bed comfortably. Philip brought her a pillow and blankets from his room, and then he stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Well, good night then, Sarah." "Good night, Philip. And thank you for everything, for giving me a chance. Thank you for coming all this way, for taking a chance on me." He closed the door gently, and Sarah was alone. She changed into her nightgown, brushed out her hair, and climbed into bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, and the blankets smelled of fresh air from having been hung on a line to dry. Through the thin wall, she could hear Philip moving around, getting ready for his own sleep. Sarah lay in the darkness and thought about the strangeness of this day. This morning she had been on a stagecoach, terrified of the reception she would receive. Now she was lying in a bed in Arizona territory, married to a man she had met only hours ago. It should have felt frightening. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something good. She fell asleep listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, the creak of the house settling, the distant call of some night bird, the soft sound of Philip's breathing from the next room. Sarah woke to the gray light of dawn and the sound of Philip moving around the main room. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress, pinned up her hair, and emerged to find him stoking the fire in the stove. "Good morning," he said, looking surprised to see her up. "I was trying to be quiet." "I am an early riser," Sarah said. "Always have been. Let me make breakfast." "You do not have to do that." "I want to. Please." Philip relented, and Sarah made coffee and fried eggs from a basket she had found in the root cellar, along with potatoes she diced and fried until they were crispy. They ate together as the sun rose, painting the world in shades of gold. "I need to ride out and check on the cattle today," Philip said. "Make sure they have not wandered too far, check the water sources. Would you like to come with me? Or would you prefer to stay here and settle in?" Sarah thought about that. She could unpack her trunk, explore the house, begin to make it feel like a home. But she would have time for all that. What she wanted was to see more of this land, to understand the work Philip did, to spend time with this man she had married. "I would like to come with you if I would not be in the way." "You would not be in the way at all. Can you ride?" "I can. It has been a few years, but I used to ride fairly well." "Then we will saddle up after breakfast." An hour later, Sarah found herself on a gentle mare named Daisy, following Philip on his sturdy gelding across the rangeland. She wore a split-riding skirt she had brought with her, practical for this new life, and a wide-brimmed hat Philip had given her to protect her face from the sun. The morning was cool but warming quickly. Philip led them toward a line of cottonwood trees that marked a creek bed, explaining that the cattle liked to gather there where the water and shade were. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks, shared stories about the land and his work. "I bought this place 10 years ago," he said. "I had been working as a ranch hand for other people since I was 15, saving every penny. When this land came available, I scraped together enough for the down payment. It took me 7 years to pay it off completely. You must have worked very hard. I did, but it was worth it. There is something about owning your own land, answering to no one but yourself. Of course, that also means when things go wrong, you have no one to blame but yourself. They found the cattle spread out along the creek, grazing peacefully. Philip dismounted and walked among them, checking them with an experienced eye. Sarah stayed on her horse, watching him work. He moved with confidence and ease, talking softly to the animals, his hands gentle when he examined them. "They look good," he said when he returned to his horse. "No injuries, no signs of disease. The grass has been decent this year. We had good rain in the spring." They rode further, checking water sources and fences. Philip showed her the boundaries of his property, pointing out where his land ended and his neighbors began. The work was peaceful, and Sarah found herself enjoying the rhythm of it, the vast open sky above them, the sun warm on her back. Around midday, they stopped by a small spring to water the horses and eat the lunch Sarah had packed. They sat in the shade of a rocky outcropping, sharing bread and cheese and dried apples. "What do you think so far?" Philip asked. "About all this, I mean. The ranch, the work, Arizona territory." "It is different from anything I have known," Sarah said honestly, "but I find I like it. There is a freedom here, a space to breathe. Missouri had become stifling to me, full of memories and expectations." "I felt that way about Wyoming," Philip said. "That is where I grew up. My family had a small ranch there. When my parents died, my older brother inherited it all. That is the way it works, the oldest son gets everything. So I came south, looking for a place to make my own way." "Do you have other siblings?" "Two sisters, both married and settled in Wyoming. My brother and I do not speak much. There was some bitterness when I left. That must be hard. It was at first. But a man has to make his own path. I have no regrets about the choice I made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses graze nearby. A hawk circled overhead, and in the distance, Sarah could see the cattle moving slowly across the land. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Philip said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you really answer my advertisement? I mean, you are an educated woman, clearly capable. You could have found work, made a life for yourself in Missouri. Why come all the way out here to marry a stranger?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I was lonely, as I said, but it was more than that. After my husband died, I felt invisible. I would go to church, and people would pat my hand and tell me how sorry they were, but no one really saw me. I was just the widow Preston, someone to be pitied. When I read your advertisement, when I read your letters, I felt seen again. You asked me about my thoughts, my opinions. You cared what I had to say. And I suppose I wanted to feel like a whole person again, not just someone defined by her loss." Philip nodded slowly. "I understand that. After so many years alone, I felt like I was disappearing too, like I was becoming just my work, nothing more. Your letters reminded me that there was more to life than mending fences and moving cattle." "Then perhaps we are both getting a second chance," Sarah said. "Perhaps we are." They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon, and Philip spent the rest of the day doing chores while Sarah began the work of making the house a home. She unpacked her trunk, putting her clothes in the empty dresser in the spare room. She found curtain fabric she had brought with her and began measuring windows. She cleaned and organized, swept floors and washed windows, and with each task, the house began to feel a little less like Philip's bachelor home and a little more like a place where they both belonged. For dinner, she made a stew from canned vegetables and some dried beef, and they ate together again by lamplight. Afterward, they sat outside on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast dark sky. "There are so many more stars here than in town," Sarah said, marveling at the brilliant display above them. "No buildings or trees to block the view," Philip said. I never get tired of looking at them. You know the constellations, some of them. My father taught me a few when I was a boy. There is the Big Dipper, and if you follow those two stars at the end, they point to the North Star. They sat together in the darkness, and Philip pointed out the constellations he knew. His voice was soft and patient, and Sarah found herself moving a little closer to him on the porch steps, drawn by his warmth in the cooling night air. "I am glad you are here, Sarah," Philip said quietly. "I know it has only been a day, but already the house feels different, feels lived in. I am glad I am here too." That night, Sarah slept more soundly, and over the next few weeks, a routine established itself. Philip would wake early and handle the most urgent chores while Sarah made breakfast. They would eat together, discussing the day's work, and then Philip would head out to work the ranch while Sarah managed the house and garden. She had found a neglected vegetable patch behind the house and had begun clearing it, preparing it for a fall planting of cool weather crops. In the evenings, they would sit together, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future. Sarah learned that Philip had always dreamed of having a larger herd, of perhaps adding sheep to the ranch, of building a bigger barn. Philip learned that Sarah had always wanted to travel, to see the ocean, to visit the big cities back east. "Maybe someday we can take a trip," Philip said one evening, "when the ranch is doing well enough that I can afford to hire someone to watch it for a few weeks." "That would be wonderful," Sarah said, though she did not really believe it would happen. Dreams were one thing, reality was something else, but it was nice to imagine. One afternoon in late August, Sarah was working in the garden when she heard a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw a woman driving a small wagon, two children bouncing on the seat beside her. The woman pulled up to the house and climbed down with a practiced ease, revealing a round, friendly face and a generous smile. She was perhaps 30 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be Sarah," the woman said, walking over with her hand extended. "I am Beatrice Morrison. My husband, Tom, and I have the ranch about 5 miles east of here. I heard Philip had gotten married, and I had to come meet you. These are my children, Daniel and Emma." The children, a boy of about 7 and a girl of 5, waved shyly from the wagon. "It is lovely to meet you," Sarah said, shaking Beatrice's hand. "Would you like some water? Or I could make tea. Tea would be wonderful, if it is not too much trouble." Sarah led Beatrice and the children into the house, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the still sparse furnishings. But Beatrice did not seem to notice or care. She settled at the table with an easy familiarity while her children explored the main room with the curiosity of the young. "I hope you do not mind me just showing up like this," Beatrice said, as Sarah put the kettle on. "We do not stand on ceremony much out here. There are so few of us that when we get the chance for company, we take it." "I do not mind at all. In fact, I am grateful. I have been wondering how to meet the neighbors." "Well, let me tell you about everyone then. Tom and I have been here for 8 years. We have 200 acres and run cattle and some chickens. Our place is a bit bigger than Philip's, but that is only because Tom's father helped us get started. Then there are the Johnsons, about 3 miles south. They are older, been here since Snowflake was founded. They run mostly sheep, which some of the cattle ranchers do not love, but they are good people." Beatrice went on, filling Sarah in on the small community of ranchers spread across the high desert around Snowflake. There were perhaps 20 families within a 10-mile radius, some Mormon, some not, all working hard to scratch a living from the land. "We get together for dances sometimes," Beatrice said, "and barn raisings when someone needs help. The winters can be isolating, so we make an effort to stay connected. You will have to come to the next dance. They are not fancy, but they are fun. That sounds lovely. They talked for over an hour, and by the time Beatrice loaded her children back into the wagon and headed home, Sarah felt like she had made a real friend. It was a good feeling, a settling feeling, as if another piece of her new life had fallen into place. When Philip came in that evening, Sarah told him about the visit and he smiled. Beatrice is good people, Tom too. They were some of the first to welcome me when I moved here. She invited us to a dance. We should go. It has been a long time since I went to one, but it would be good for you to meet more people. The dance was held 2 weeks later in the big barn on the Johnson property. It seemed like everyone from miles around had come, wagons and horses crowding the yard. Inside the barn, lanterns hung from the rafters, and someone played a fiddle while another man accompanied on a guitar. The music was lively and cheerful, and people of all ages filled the space. Sarah felt nervous walking in on Philip's arm, but Beatrice immediately swept over and began introducing her around. The women were friendly and welcoming, eager to share advice about living in the territory, about where to buy supplies, about how to prepare for winter. The men nodded to her respectfully, and several commented to Philip that he was a lucky man. When the dancing started, Philip led Sarah onto the floor for a Virginia reel. She was rusty at first, but the steps came back to her, and soon she was laughing, spinning through the movements, Philip's hand warm and sure in hers. His eyes shone with happiness, and she realized this might be the most carefree she had seen him. They danced several more dances, and when they finally stopped to catch their breath, Philip brought her a cup of cool cider. "You are a wonderful dancer," he said. "You are not so bad yourself," Sarah replied, flushed and happy. "I had forgotten how much fun this could be." As the evening wore on, Sarah watched Philip talking and laughing with his neighbors, and she saw the respect they had for him. These people knew him as a hard worker, an honest man, a good neighbor. She felt proud to be his wife. On the ride home, under a sky brilliant with stars, Philip reached over and took Sarah's hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and Sarah felt her heart skip. "I have been thinking," Philip said, his voice quiet in the darkness, "about our arrangement. About how we said we would take things slow, give ourselves time." "Yes," Sarah said, her pulse quickening. "I find myself not wanting to sleep in separate rooms anymore. I find myself missing you at night, even though you are just on the other side of the wall. I have feelings for you, Sarah. Real feelings, and I am hoping you might feel something for me too." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I do, Philip. I have been feeling the same way. I did not want to presume, did not want to push. So you would be willing to be my wife in truth, not just on paper. I would, very much." Philip pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the dark road and turned to her. In the starlight, she could see the emotion on his face. He cupped her cheek with his calloused hand, gentle despite his strength, and leaned in to kiss her. This kiss was different from the chaste peck at their wedding. This kiss was deep and full of promise and desire. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Philip rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Sarah. I think I have been since I read your first letter." "I am falling in love with you too," Sarah whispered. "You are a good man, Philip Wade, the best man I have ever known." They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was a charged silence, full of anticipation. When they arrived at the ranch, Philip took care of the horse quickly, and then they were walking into the house together, hand in hand. That night, Sarah moved her things into Philip's room, and they became husband and wife in every sense. Philip was tender and patient, and Sarah felt cherished in a way she had not felt in many years. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah thought that she had never felt so content, so completely at home. The weeks turned into months, and summer faded into fall. Sarah's garden produced a bounty of vegetables that she canned and stored for winter. Philip sold his cattle in October, getting a good price that allowed him to buy supplies and put money away for the future. They worked together to prepare for winter, cutting wood, making repairs to the house, ensuring they would be comfortable when the cold came. And the cold did come, fierce and sudden in late November. Snow fell in thick white blankets, transforming the red desert into a world of white. The temperature dropped below freezing and stayed there for days at a time. Sarah was grateful for the warm house and full pantry, for the companionship of the man she now loved with her whole heart. They spent the long winter evenings by the fire, Sarah sewing or mending while Philip carved wood or repaired tack. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other from the few books they had. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their lives, their thoughts on everything and nothing. In January, a blizzard struck that kept them housebound for 3 days. They could not even make it to the barn except by following a rope Philip strung from the house to feed the animals. The wind howled and snow piled in deep drifts against the buildings. But inside, Sarah felt safe and warm. She and Philip played cards, told stories, made love in the afternoon when the light was gray and soft through the snow-covered windows. "I am glad I am not alone this winter," Philip said one evening, holding Sarah close as they lay in bed listening to the wind. "I have spent too many winters by myself, and I do not think I really understood how lonely I was until I had you here to compare it to." "I am glad I am here too," Sarah said. "I cannot imagine being anywhere else now. This is home." When spring finally came in late March, it felt like a resurrection. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath. Green began to appear as new grass pushed through. The cattle, which Philip had kept close to the ranch through the winter, began to spread out again, seeking the fresh grazing. Sarah planted her garden in earnest, putting in all manner of vegetables and some flowers too, because she wanted beauty as well as utility. She and Beatrice had become close friends over the winter, visiting when weather allowed, and Beatrice had given her seeds and advice. One morning in early April, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She was 43 now, and she had assumed that part of her life was finished. But as the days passed and the nausea began, followed by a tender fullness in her breasts, she began to suspect the truth. She did not tell Philip right away. She wanted to be certain, and there was no doctor in Snowflake. She would have to wait and see. But as the weeks passed and her symptoms continued, as her belly began to show the slightest curve, she knew. She chose to tell him on a warm evening in early May. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah took Philip's hand and placed it on her belly. "Philip, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concerned by the seriousness in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right. I am pregnant." Philip's eyes went wide. "Pregnant, are you sure?" "I am sure. I know my own body. I would guess I am about 3 months along. The baby should come in early November." Philip sat stunned for a moment, and then a smile spread across his face, bright and wondering. "A baby? We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, suddenly uncertain. They had not discussed children. She had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. "Happy." "Sarah, I am beyond happy. I am amazed. I had given up on the idea of having a family. I thought I would live and die alone on this ranch, and now I have you and we are going to have a child. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I am 43 years old and I am going to have a baby. If someone had told me that a year ago, I would have thought they were mad. But yes, I am happy. Scared, but happy. "We will take care of you," Philip promised. "Whatever you need, we will make it happen." True to his word, Philip became even more attentive. He would not let Sarah do any heavy work, insisted she rest more, worried constantly about her well-being. Sarah found it both endearing and exasperating. She was pregnant, not fragile, and she had done this twice before, but she also understood his concern. She was older, and childbirth was always risky. Many women did not survive it, and those who did sometimes lost the child. Sarah pushed away those dark thoughts and focused on taking care of herself, eating well, resting when she needed to. Beatrice was delighted by the news and immediately began knitting small things, blankets and caps and booties. "You are going to be just fine," she assured Sarah. "I had Emma when I was 35, and the doctor said I was old for childbearing, but look how well she turned out." As summer progressed, Sarah's belly grew. She felt the baby move for the first time in July, a fluttering like butterfly wings, and she cried with joy. Philip liked to place his hand on her belly in the evenings, marveling at the kicks and rolls of their child. They prepared a space in the second bedroom for the baby, clearing it out completely and painting the walls a soft cream color. Sarah sewed blankets and tiny clothes, and Philip built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. In September, a doctor from Holbrook, the nearest larger town, came through Snowflake on his rounds, and Philip insisted Sarah see him. The doctor, an older man named Dr. Reynolds, examined her carefully. "Everything looks good, Mrs. Wade," he said. "The baby seems healthy and you are carrying well. I will not lie to you. At your age, there are more risks, but you seem strong and healthy. I do not see any reason why you should not deliver safely." "What should I watch for?" Sarah asked. "Signs of trouble." Dr. Reynolds gave her a list of symptoms to be aware of and made her promise to send for him if anything seemed wrong. "I will try to be here for the delivery," he said. "But I cannot make promises. I have to travel a large territory. If you go into labor and I cannot get here in time, do you have someone who can help?" "Beatrice Morrison has helped deliver babies before," Sarah said. "She said she would come." "Good. She is competent. You should be fine with her." As fall arrived and Sarah's due date approached, Philip grew increasingly nervous. He checked on her constantly, worried about every twinge or pain. Sarah found it sweet, even as she tried to reassure him that everything was normal. In the first week of November, Sarah woke in the night to feel her water break. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake Philip immediately, but he sensed her movement. "What is wrong?" he asked, instantly alert. "The baby is coming. My water just broke." Philip was out of bed in an instant, lighting a lamp, his hands shaking. "I will go get Beatrice. Will you be all right alone?" "I will be fine. First babies take a long time, and I have done this before. But yes, go get Beatrice." Philip dressed in record time and was out the door. Sarah got up carefully and changed into a clean nightgown. She felt the first contraction, a tightening across her belly that was uncomfortable but not yet painful. She had time. Philip returned with Beatrice in less than an hour, both of them riding hard. Beatrice immediately took charge, sending Philip to boil water and gather clean linens, checking Sarah's progress with experienced hands. "You are doing just fine," Beatrice said. "But this is going to take a while. Your body knows what to do, Sarah. Just trust it." The labor progressed slowly through the day. Philip stayed nearby, holding Sarah's hand when the contractions grew stronger, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering words of encouragement. Beatrice monitored everything carefully, her calm presence a steadying force. As evening approached, the contractions grew much stronger and closer together. Sarah labored through them, focusing on her breathing, on getting through each wave of pain. And then, finally, the urge to push came. "All right, Sarah," Beatrice said. "Next contraction you push. The baby is coming." Sarah bore down with all her strength, Philip supporting her back, and she felt the baby move lower. Again and again she pushed, exhausted but determined, until finally, in the last light of evening, the baby slipped free with a cry. "It is a boy," Beatrice announced, lifting the squalling infant. A healthy baby boy. She placed the baby on Sarah's chest, and Sarah looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son. He had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, though unfocused, seemed to look right at her. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she held him. Philip was crying too, looking at his son with wonder and joy. "He is beautiful. He is perfect." "He is," Sarah agreed, exhausted but elated. Beatrice finished the delivery and got Sarah cleaned up and comfortable, then showed Philip how to swaddle the baby properly. "He is a good size," she said. "Maybe 7 pounds, and his cry is strong. Those are good signs." After Beatrice left, promising to check on them the next day, Sarah and Philip lay together with their son between them, marveling at what they had created. "What should we name him?" Philip asked softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. Sarah had been thinking about this for weeks. "I was thinking Matthew. It means gift of God, and he is a gift, Philip, the greatest gift." "Matthew Wade," Philip said, testing the name. "I like it. Matthew Wade it is." Little Matthew was a good baby, content to nurse and sleep for long stretches. Sarah recovered well from the delivery, and within a few weeks, she was back to doing light work around the house, always with Matthew close by in the cradle Philip had made. Philip was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could, marveling at every small development. When Matthew smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, Philip nearly wept with joy. When Matthew began to babble and coo, Philip would talk to him for hours, explaining about the ranch and the cattle and everything he would teach his son. Winter came again, but this year it felt different. The house was filled with the sounds of a baby, with life and love and family. Sarah and Philip would sit by the fire in the evenings, Matthew sleeping in Sarah's arms or playing on a blanket on the floor, and they would talk about the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Philip said one evening. "Maybe buy another 80 acres to the north. There is a parcel for sale. With more land, we could run more cattle, make more money. I want to provide well for you and Matthew." "We are doing fine now," Sarah said. "But if that is your dream, then we should work toward it." "What are your dreams, Sarah?" Sarah looked down at their son, then over at her husband. "I have everything I dreamed of right here. A good man who loves me, a child, a home. What more could I want? That trip we talked about, to see the ocean." "Someday," Sarah said, "when Matthew is older, but for now I am content right where I am." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their son. Matthew was walking by his first birthday, talking in short sentences by his second. He had Philip's blue eyes and Sarah's dark hair, and he was curious about everything, constantly exploring, getting into mischief. When Matthew was 3, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. It was unexpected but not unwanted. She was 46 now, and she knew the risks were even greater than before. But she also trusted in God's plan and her own body's wisdom. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Sarah was more tired, more uncomfortable. But in July of 1887, she delivered another healthy baby, this time a daughter. They named her Grace because that is what she was, pure grace. Philip was beside himself with joy. "A daughter," he kept saying, holding the tiny girl with such gentleness. "I have a daughter." Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. He would bring Sarah clean diapers and tell Grace stories in his high, childish voice. It was clear he took his role as big brother very seriously. The ranch continued to prosper. Philip did buy that additional land to the north, and he hired a young man named Jack to help with the work. Jack was 20 years old, good with cattle, and respectful. He lived in a small cabin Philip built near the barn and took his meals with the family most evenings. Sarah managed the household and garden, raised the children, and helped with the ranch accounts. She discovered she had a head for numbers, and under her management, they began to save more money, plan better for the future. Philip relied on her advice more and more, making no major decisions without consulting her first. When Matthew was 5, Sarah began teaching him to read and write. There was a small school in Snowflake now, but it was 10 miles away, too far for a daily trip. So Sarah took on the role of teacher, using the books she had brought from Missouri and others she ordered from catalogs. She taught him arithmetic and geography, history and science. Matthew was a bright child, eager to learn, and he soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Grace was different, quieter and more thoughtful. She would sit and observe the world around her with serious eyes, missing nothing. She adored her father and would follow him around the ranch when she was old enough, asking endless questions about the animals and the work. Sarah watched her family grow and thrive, and she felt a deep contentment she had never known in her youth. She had wisdom now, earned through years and experience and loss. She understood that happiness was not a constant state, but something you built day by day, choice by choice. She and Philip chose each other every day, and that made all the difference. One evening when Matthew was 7 and Grace was 4, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Philip had his arm around Sarah, and the children were playing a game with sticks and stones they had invented. "Do you remember the day I arrived in Snowflake?" Sarah asked Philip quietly. "When you first saw me and realized I was not what you expected." "I remember," Philip said. "I was surprised, I will not lie, but it was the best surprise of my life. You said age meant wisdom to you. Did I live up to that? Have I been wise?" Philip turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of love. "Sarah, you have been everything I needed and more. Your wisdom has guided this family, built this home, made me a better man. I thank God every day that you took a chance on me, that you came all this way." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Sarah said, leaning into him. "Mama, Papa, look," Matthew called. He had arranged his sticks and stones into a pattern. "I made a picture of the ranch." They looked, and sure enough, there was a rough representation of the house and barn, the corrals and fences. Philip and Sarah both praised his creativity, and Grace immediately began making her own design. As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She thought of the woman she had been, terrified and uncertain, stepping off that stagecoach with a lie weighing on her conscience. She thought of Philip looking at her with those clear blue eyes, and seeing past her age to the person she was inside. Life was not always easy. The ranch work was hard, money was sometimes tight, the winters were long, and there were still moments of loneliness when Philip was away for days at a time moving cattle or when illness struck one of the children. But through it all, they had each other. They had built something real and lasting, something that would endure. Years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Matthew grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. By the time he was 12, he could rope and brand cattle as well as any man. He had his father's work ethic and his mother's quick mind, a combination that served him well. Grace grew into a thoughtful, observant child who loved books as much as she loved the outdoors. She would read anything Sarah gave her and then ask for more. She also showed a talent for drawing, sketching the landscape and animals around the ranch with surprising skill for one so young. When Matthew was 14, he began talking about maybe going to college someday, studying to be a veterinarian. Philip was supportive, though the idea of his son leaving the ranch someday pained him. Sarah encouraged Matthew's dreams while reminding him that he had time to decide. Grace, at 11, announced she wanted to be a teacher. She already helped her mother teach the younger children of nearby ranchers who would come to the Wade Ranch once a week for lessons. Sarah had started this informal school when Matthew was small, and it had grown over the years. She now taught 6 children ranging from ages 5 to 13, holding class in the main room of the house. In the spring of 1897, when Sarah was 56 and Philip was 46, they decided to take that trip they had talked about so many years ago. Matthew, now 17, was capable of managing the ranch with Jack's help. Grace, at 14, would stay with Beatrice. They took the train to California, and for 2 weeks they explored San Francisco and the coast. Sarah stood on the beach and watched the Pacific Ocean roll in, tears streaming down her face at the sheer magnitude of it. Philip held her hand and they waded in the cold water, laughing like children. They ate in restaurants, visited museums, walked through the city streets amazed by the bustle and noise. But after 2 weeks, they were both ready to go home. The city was exciting, but it was not where they belonged. When they arrived back at the ranch, Matthew and Grace ran out to meet them, full of stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. The house was clean, the chores were done, and everything had run smoothly. Sarah and Philip looked at each other and smiled, proud of the children they had raised. That night, lying in their own bed, Sarah said, "It was a wonderful trip, but I was homesick almost the entire time." "Me too," Philip admitted. "Turns out we are not city people. No, we are not. We are ranch people, Arizona people. This is where we belong." As Matthew approached 18, he made his decision about his future. "I want to go to the agricultural college in Tucson," he told his parents. "They have a program in animal husbandry and veterinary science, but I will come back. I want to help run the ranch, make it even better. Maybe we could expand into breeding horses. I have some ideas." Philip clapped his son on the shoulder, his eyes bright with pride. "That sounds like a fine plan, son. Your mother and I will help you with the tuition." Matthew left for college in the fall of 1898, and the house felt emptier without him. But he wrote home every week, full of stories about his classes and new knowledge. He came home for the summers and worked harder than ever, implementing new techniques he had learned. Grace continued her education at home with Sarah, but she also began taking correspondence courses in literature and art. She was determined to be well educated, even though she had no plans to leave the ranch. "This is my home," she told Sarah, "but I want to know about the wider world too." In 1901, Matthew graduated from college and returned home to stay. He brought with him a young woman named Elizabeth, a fellow student he had fallen in love with. Elizabeth was from Tucson, a city girl, but she was eager to learn ranch life and had a genuine love for animals. Philip and Sarah gave their blessing, and Matthew and Elizabeth were married in Snowflake in a ceremony that brought together the entire community. Sarah watched her son pledge his life to his bride and remembered her own wedding day, how nervous she had been, how Philip had looked past her age and seen her worth. Now she was watching her son begin his own journey, and her heart was full. Matthew and Elizabeth built their own house on the ranch property, and soon the sound of children's laughter filled the land again. They had 2 children in quick succession, a boy and a girl, and Philip and Sarah became grandparents. Grace, at 18, surprised everyone by falling in love with a young teacher who came to Snowflake to run the new proper school that had finally been built. His name was Henry, and he was educated and thoughtful, perfect for Grace. They married when she was 20, and Grace continued to teach while raising her own family. The years flowed by, marked by births and deaths, good years and hard years, but always anchored by the love Sarah and Philip shared. They were in their 60s now, moving a bit slower, their hair fully gray or white. Philip's hands were gnarled with arthritis, and Sarah's vision was not what it once was. But they were still together, still in love, still partners in every sense of the word. One evening in the fall of 1909, they sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Matthew was working near the barn with his eldest son, teaching him the same skills Philip had taught Matthew. Grace was visiting with her 3 children, and the house was full of noise and life. "You ever regret it?" Philip asked Sarah suddenly. "Answering that advertisement, coming out here to marry a stranger?" Sarah looked at him, at the man who had given her a second chance at life, who had loved her for exactly who she was. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Philip. A home, a family, purpose, love. What could I possibly regret?" "I was afraid when you got off that stage-coach," Philip admitted. "Afraid you would be disappointed in me, in the ranch, in the life I could offer. I was terrified you would reject me when you saw how old I was," Sarah said. "I had lied to you with that photograph. I thought you would turn me away. Best decision I ever made, looking past that picture and seeing the woman in front of me." Philip took her hand, his grip still strong despite his arthritis. "Age does mean wisdom, Sarah. You taught me that. You have made my life richer in every way." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked and loved for so many years. The desert air was cooling, carrying the scent of sage and pinyon pine. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. The grandchildren's laughter rang out clear and bright. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this porch, to this moment. She had been a widow with grown children, lonely and invisible, afraid her life was over at 42. Instead, she had found a new beginning, a great adventure, a love deeper and more true than she had ever known. She had been older than expected, but Philip had seen her wisdom. And together, they had built a legacy that would last long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would continue to work this land, to love it as they had loved it. The Wade Ranch would endure. "I love you, Philip Wade," Sarah said softly, squeezing his hand. "I love you, Sarah Wade," Philip replied. "Today and always." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, as their family gathered for the evening meal, as life continued its beautiful, ordinary rhythm, Sarah and Philip sat together, 2 people who had taken a chance on each other and found everything they had been searching for. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand adventures, though they had lived through plenty of challenges. It was a story of quiet love, of daily choices to honor and cherish each other, of wisdom earned and shared, of a partnership that had stood the test of time. It was, in the end, a story of 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most, and had built a life together in the Wild West that was full of meaning, purpose, and enduring love. The children called them in for dinner, and Philip helped Sarah to her feet. They walked into the house together, hand in hand as they had walked through life, ready to share another meal, another evening, another day of the life they had created together. And in that simple moment, surrounded by family in the home they had built, they had everything they could ever want or need.